Imagine you wake up one morning, you stumble into the shower and there's no water. Imagine next you go to make your coffee in the kitchen but there's no electricity. And then when you go to get into your car, it's gone. The final straw is you have no data to call a taxi. Yes, it's going to be a rough day. But imagine this is your day every day. Sadly, this is the reality for hundreds of millions of Africans, especially women. I've met mothers who barely made it to the health clinic alive to deliver their babies safely. I've talked with too many children who've dropped out of school due to their long daily commute. And I've passed field after field of crops rotting before they could get to local markets. And as a consequence, across the continent, time, productivity, health, and education all suffer. Mobility is the linchpin to our quality of life. It's the linchpin to our progress and economic and social development. My name is Shanta Bloemen, and I'm the founder of Mobility for Africa. Our aim is to solve the mobility crisis for those who need it most, rural communities, especially women, by providing green energy mobility solutions. I grew up in a family that didn't fit the mode. A Belgian father, an American mother growing up in suburban Perth in Western Australia. In a house, class, race or wealth were not the basis of respect, and our dinner table always had a diverse lineup of guests. It was surprising then my parents decided to surround me with nuns at a Catholic school. The school motto was Seek Justice. My missionary zeal started early, with my best friend at age 8 being a nun. Sister Trish, my 3rd grade teacher, who told me she was married to Jesus, became my role model. As a teenager, the religious zeal dissipated into a self-righteous activist who demonstrated at every protest rally, whether it was against apartheid or nuclear war. I wanted to take on every injustice. My own version of Bob Geldof's Live Aid concert at school in 1986 turned into a stand-up with the principal about whether the students needed permission slips to attend. At university, I became a groupie of Professor Norman Etherington, a silver-haired Yale-educated history professor. He was an expert on 19th century empire building and colonialism in Africa. He unpacked white supremacy. He talked about how divide and rule shaped African identity and how a race for economic wealth drove the conquest. It filled me with outrage and curiosity, but it also kindled a passion to travel to Africa and led me to Kopa, a remote village in northern Zambia, to do volunteer work. And like every household there, I had to walk 2 kilometres to the river to get my water. Trying to carry a 5-litre water bucket on my head was a disaster. I got wet, my head hurt, I barely could make the journey without losing at least half the water. The younger children and women laughed at me. I had to depend on Agnes, my friend, who, feeling sorry for me, often made an extra trip so I could at least wash and cook. It was tough, but I knew my time was short and I could leave. But it also left me in awe of how strong and resilient African women are and how their daily lives were so labour-intensive. After Zambia, I travelled some more until my savings depleted. I needed to figure out a longer-term plan. Next stop was New York. I was driven by the idea that if I could be part of explaining and showing people in the rich world who had the power why life was so unfair in Africa, they would change it. I planned to become a famous documentary maker, the next Michael Moore, and expose injustice. As destiny had it, I instead landed a consultancy at UNICEF, the UN agency that works for the rights of women and children, in their film and TV unit. I was delighted. Finally, I'd be in a position to make change. At UNICEF, my job was storytelling. I was to give a human face to women and children's lives in remote areas, to create empathy, to illustrate how their lives could be changed, and solicit funds that could be used to support the organisation's work. After graduate school at Columbia University and choking under the pressures of student loans, I jumped at a job with UNICEF back in Africa. I ended up in Zimbabwe doing communications. I arrived as the economic meltdown started to hit. In the midst of the crisis, I met and married Munyuradi Gusai, a grassroots labour activist and academic. He gave me a first-hand seat to fighting for social justice in a country grappling with hyperinflation and divisive politics. But when a promotion was offered, I took it and moved to UNICEF's regional office covering Southeast Asia. As the toll of the frequent commute back and forth to Zimbabwe with our son Sankara grew, I was desperate to return to the continent. My next job as head of UNICEF's media hub in Johannesburg was probably the best job I'd ever had. With bosses far away in New York, I was tasked to travel the continent and tell the forgotten stories of children and their families. It reconnected me with the lives of women in rural Africa and reminded me how little had changed. Their life was caught in a time warp. They were still schlepping water for hours a day, carrying children and heavy loads. The job offer to China came out of the blue, but with all the Chinese investment in Africa and the global centres of power shifting, it seemed too good an opportunity to miss. This was the chance to understand the China-Africa narrative from Beijing. So I entered a world that was changing faster than anywhere else I'd lived before. I was surrounded by new innovative ideas that could quickly go to scale. Each day there was another tech company creating a new way of doing things, from how we travel, communicate, shop, and even experiments in a shared economy where we didn't even need to own things, but we could use them when we needed them. This sharply contrasted with my days filled with endless meetings and more talk about the problem rather than an honest reflection on the solution. My frustration started to grow. I realised I'd failed. I was not changing the world. Charity and top-down development was not going to bring the social justice I so deeply believed in. I read more and more about the growing world of social enterprise, impact investment, and entrepreneurship. So I threw caution to the wind. While my parents worried, I gave up my UN paycheck. I wanted to do something concrete and practical. I was going to return to Africa where my passion lay. And learning from China, I was going to be part of bringing the green energy mobility revolution to change the way rural women travelled. In China, transport is ubiquitous, from high-speed trains that whisk you 1,000 kilometres in 5 hours to the three-wheel electric tricycle used by women to move and carry heavy loads between their field, their home and the market. The Sandlacher, as it's called, is a three-wheel tricycle and has been around for a while, initially pedal-driven and then it became petrol and in the last 5 years electric. Why could this electric revolution not benefit African women? 80% of the farmland in Africa is managed by small-scale farmers, half of them women. They produce 80% of the food supply. With most agricultural land far from potential markets and good roads, the need for last-mile transport solutions seems clear. There is also a growing body of evidence that clearly demonstrates how empowering women is the most powerful force for change in the world today. So I registered Mobility for Africa, our startup in Zimbabwe. As the cliche goes, execution is the difference between a good idea and a successful business. So if I'd hoped that my pitch deck alone would attract the seed money we needed, we'd still be waiting. With money instead, raised through crowdfunding and leveraging academic partnerships along with smart students to help us, we launched our pilot. We needed to test our model and our assumptions so we could prepare it for scalability. This was something that was new, and we also needed to master the technology in remote off-grid areas. And if the Sandlacher was going to be African, it needed an African name. Humba means go in Ndebele. It's not been as simple as I thought, but we're making progress. I've been told more than once by people in the investor sector that rural women who earn less than $5 a day will be too poor to rent or use the tricycles. But we've already proven that assumption wrong. We know that there's demand. We know most of the customers are not in a position to just come to a showroom and buy. We know that we need to be focused on how we provide the right entry point so they can rent, lease or hire as they need. We need to be listening and talking with them, learning from what works and what doesn't. Gogo Nelly, one of our customers, is a 68-year-old grandmother of 6 grandchildren. And with the Humba, she's tripled her income by using the transport to sell more bread buns she makes in her makeshift underground oven. She now has enough money to feed and pay school fees for all her grandchildren. And these stories of individual success are multiplying. Babies are now being delivered at the clinic, farmers are getting their crops to the market and being able to earn more money. Transport and logistics services with the Humba are easing the burden for small businesses. Mobility for Africa, to me, is a nexus of so many things. It's about changing the status of women, it's about renewable energy, it's about batteries and energy storage, it's about rural transformation, it's about climate change. But ultimately, it's about giving everyone the freedom and time that mobility provides. And so while I still need long-term and visionary investors, the good news is for Mobility for Africa, we're starting to get traction. Already, we're one of 140 global innovators that will be showcased at the Dubai World Expo next year. We have a global car company supporting our work, and we have a lot of individuals already asking where they can get the Humba. While the days can be stressful, and I don't for a second regret giving up on the day job, our pilots worked. We know definitively mobility can dramatically change lives. So the next time you get in your car, put the kids on a bus for school or hop in an Uber, think about rural Africa. We have the ability to rapidly scale up and ensure every rural woman has a new way to travel.